This dusty old ranch might just look like open pasture to some folks, but to me, it's family. It's the land my great-grandfather carved out by hand over a century ago. Every fence post, every trail, every patch of worn-down soil has our name written into its roots. So when Karen, the self-appointed queen of the nearby HOA, decided to throw up a gate and declare part of my land community green space, she didn't just mess with property lines. She challenged a legacy. She thought her little bylaws meant more than my deed. She thought her clipboard could overrule 4 generations of blood and sweat. That was her first mistake, because the day she tried to claim my pasture was the day I made it my mission to own everything she stood on. Why great-grandfather didn't believe in debt, shortcuts, or fences he couldn't build himself. Back in 1911, he carved out a stretch of land that ran along a narrow ridge, then sloped down into wild pasture and creek-fed grassland. No power tools, no tractors, just mules, calloused hands, and stubborn pride. He registered every acre with the county, handwritten deeds stored in leather pouches for safekeeping, signed and sealed by men whose names now mark roads and towns. By the time I inherited the ranch, it had passed through 4 generations, each one adding a little something: a new barn, a gravel drive, a covered porch, a hand-dug well. What never changed? The land. It always stayed whole, unbroken, ours. I didn't move out here to start a fight. I came back for peace, to reconnect with the roots that raised me. But people like Karen don't care about roots. They care about control. The trouble started not long after I moved in. I'd only been back on the land for a couple of months, fixing the old gates, clearing brush, repainting the front fence in that faded barn red my grandfather always loved. Most days were quiet, the kind of silence you earn after years in the noise. But one afternoon, I came up the South Trail and saw something I hadn't placed there. A sign, a big one, white plastic, anchored into the soil with metal stakes, right near the South Pasture Gate. And on it, in bold green letters, HOA Community Greenbelt. No trespassing. I blinked. I thought it was a prank, a mistake, maybe some kids goofing off. But then I followed the old deer path around the ridge and saw 3 more signs posted at different spots along the property line. The line my great-grandfather had marked with hand car cedar posts 100 years earlier. Each sign claimed the same thing, that this section of my land, about 12 acres of hilly pasture, was now part of the Oak Shadow Estate's HOA green space. I felt a cold knot in my gut. Now, I'd seen the development going up over the past few years. Oak Shadow was one of those overly landscaped neighborhoods with matching mailboxes, identical fences, and more NO signs than actual trees. It backed up right against my eastern boundary, but it had always stayed on its side of the property line. Until now, I followed the signs up toward a freshly installed metal gate. Brand new, welded, bolted in a place right where my old cattle trail met the HOA's walking path. It didn't take long to find the source of the operation. She was standing on the other side of the gate with her arms folded, watching me like I was the one trespassing. Karen, gray bob haircut, khaki pants, and the permanent scowl of someone who'd never been told no, at least not recently. I asked her, calm and steady, "What's this gate doing on my land?" She sniffed. "This is HOA-maintained greenbelt. It's clearly marked on our community maps." I blinked. "It's not HOA anything. That's been Holloway pasture since 1911. She didn't flinch. According to our association survey, this section was designated as community nature space when Oak Shadow was developed. If you have a problem, take it up with the board. I raised an eyebrow. "Who's the board?" She smiled, like a fox looking at a chicken. "I'm the board president." Of course she was. I asked her one last time to remove the signs and the gate. She refused. Said if I tampered with them, it would be considered property damage and she'd call the sheriff. I didn't shout, didn't threaten. I just turned around and walked the long way home, up past the ridge, past the broken tree where I carved my name as a kid, and straight into the office where my great-grandfather's deed had hung on the wall for over a century. Framed, sealed, untouched, and very, very specific. I took the frame down and opened the back, pulling out the original survey map, hand-drawn and yellowed with time. Then I grabbed the updated county plat from a drawer and began comparing the overlays. Line for line, marker by marker. Karen was wrong. Not as kind of wrong. Not confused. Not misunderstood. Dead wrong. That 12-acre stretch she'd claimed for her HOA wasn't undesignated land. It was recorded, notarized, taxed, and deeded to me. Every sign she posted, trespass. Every foot of pipe used to install the gate, unauthorized construction. Every no trespassing warning she drilled in my tree, a violation. And now, it was all on paper. You'd think that'd be enough to shut her down. It wasn't. The next morning, I showed up at the gate with printed maps, a certified deed copy, and a respectful tone. I asked her, again, to remove the signage and the gate. She smiled, pulled out her phone, and called the police. Told them I was threatening common space and refusing to leave HOA property. By the time the deputy arrived, I was already standing calmly, document in hand. He stepped out, looked between us, and asked what was going on. Karen jumped in first. He's refusing to leave. He doesn't live here. This is protected greenbelt under Oak Shadow HOA. I handed the officer the paperwork and calmly replied, I live on the other side of that ridge. This pasture has been in my family since 1911. Here's the deed. Here's the survey. That gate wasn't here 2 weeks ago. The officer took his time. He read the documents. He walked the edge of the gate installation. He looked at Karen. Then he said 5 words that lit me up inside. Ma'am, this isn't your land. Karen's face dropped. She tried to recover. Said something about pending review, that she'd file a complaint, that their developer promised access to that slope. The deputy nodded politely and told her, you can take this to civil court, but you can't claim land that doesn't legally belong to your association. She fumed. I just thanked him, shook his hand, and walked back toward my ridge, not just with the law on my side, but with fire in my chest. Karen had tried to claim a pasture. What she didn't realize was she'd declared war on the wrong ranch, the wrong name, and the wrong history. And I wasn't about to let her rewrite any part of it. The gate might have been torn down, but the damage had already been done. I could have just let it in there. Told myself that Karen got embarrassed, that the deputy handled it, and that justice had spoken. But something didn't sit right with me. Because when someone tries that hard to take what's yours, when they make up rules, twist paperwork, and smile while doing it, you don't just put the gate back. You find out why they thought they could build it in the first place. And that's exactly what I did. The next day, I drove down to the county recorder's office. The woman behind the counter, Joyce, looked up from her desk, smiled, and said, let me guess. Oak Shadow again. I blinked. You've had others come in? She rolled her eyes and handed me a clipboard. 3rd one this month. All of them asking about common land boundaries. I told the last guy, if your deed's older than their neighborhood, chances are you've got nothing to worry about. I filled out the request form and asked for everything. Plat maps, survey filings, development permits, and any HOA documented overlays filed with the city. Within an hour, I had a folder the size of a phone book and a headache to match. That night, I sat down on my great-grandfather's oak table, spread out the documents, and got to work. It didn't take long to spot the inconsistencies. The Oak Shadow HOA's survey map, the one Karen waved like gospel, showed a chunk of green space that dipped directly into my recorded pasture. But when I cross-referenced that with the original development plans submitted to the county during the approval phase, I found something odd. That green space didn't exist. The approved plan ended right at the tree line, a natural ridge that was clearly marked on the topographic survey. The slope, pasture, and lower field weren't included in any HOA-maintained easement or shared lot agreement. In fact, the official boundaries for Oak Shadow ended nearly 60 yards short of where Karen had placed her signs. I went back through older filings and found something even more suspicious, a set of updated maps submitted 5 years later, without proper record of public review. They showed the expanded Greenbelt area, but with no accompanying amendment record, no legal acknowledgement of affected landowners, and no clear source for the new boundaries. It was like someone had just drawn a bigger border, and the county either never noticed or never challenged it. I called Joyce again the next morning. Is it legal to just update a plat map like that? She laughed, dry as dust. Only if it's backed by consent, signatures, and new filings. Otherwise, it's a good way to end up in court. I asked her if anyone had ever challenged Oak Shadow's paperwork. Her voice dropped. Let's just say you wouldn't be the first. That's when I decided to knock on a few doors. I didn't know many of the folks inside Oak Shadow. Most kept to themselves, probably told not to engage with the rancher. But curiosity is a strong motivator when people feel something isn't right. So I knocked on 4 doors, and all 4 had a story. One woman, late 40s, said she'd been fined for having an heirloom bench on her porch, unapproved furniture style. A retired vet told me Karen sent him 3 citations for not trimming a flower bed that was technically on his side of the property line. Another guy, he showed me a copy of a letter she sent warning him that if he used his backyard trail, which backed up to the ridge, it would be considered trespassing on HOA wildlife zones. He laughed when I showed him the actual topography maps. So, she doesn't even own the trees she's guarding? Nope. I asked if any of them had ever tried to push back. They looked at each other. She controls the board. She makes the rules. She is the HOA. One woman finally said, "We just figured she had power. Nobody wanted the fight." That stuck with me. Nobody wanted the fight. Good thing I did. A week later, I dug deeper into the HOA itself. Their nonprofit charter was filed over a decade ago. A standard setup for a homeowners association, bylaws, board member positions, shared maintenance fund, annual dues, etc. But as I kept reading, something caught my attention. Oak Shadow HOA was listed as a financially distressed entity. Twice in the last 5 years, the board had filed loss carry-forward notices with the state due to budget shortfalls. Their last IRS 990 filing showed overages on legal consultation expenses, including line items labeled boundary consultation and zoning review. That's right. They were already spending HOA money trying to prove they own land that never belonged to them, and still failing. Even worse, according to the state's nonprofit portal, their bylaws hadn't been updated in 7 years. The last official election, held via internal vote. Translation: Karen never stepped down. She just kept re-electing herself, or skipping it entirely. Then I found the real jackpot. A small footnote in the bylaws stating that in the event of extended board vacancy or legal liability, a majority stakeholder of liens or delinquent dues could petition for board reassignment. I didn't fully understand at first, but a local HOA attorney I reached out to explained. Technically, if enough of the HOA's outstanding debt or dues go unpaid and are sold to collections or held by an outside party, that party has leverage. Sometimes full control. Depends on the structure. So if you're telling me, I asked, that if the HOA is in the red, I could, in theory, buy enough of their debt to control it. He paused. In theory? Yes. Especially if the board's been skirting proper elections. That night, I sat on my porch, maps in one hand and mint tea in the other. The sun dipped low over the ridge, casting golden light over that pasture my great-grandfather walked with a lantern, a dog, and a rifle. I looked at the old cedar posts, still standing after a century. Karen thought her HOA was power. She thought a rulebook and a gate could overrule roots and records. She didn't realize she'd built her entire kingdom on a structure that could be bought, audited, and flipped like a foreclosed shed. She tried to put her flag in my soil. She was about to find out I had enough leverage and enough land to flip the entire board she ruled from. And this time, the deed would be mine. There's a difference between reacting and responding. When someone takes a swing at you, your first instinct is to swing back. That's reaction. But responding means taking a step back, reading the whole fight, and realizing you don't even need to throw a punch. You just need to flip the ring over. That's where I was. Karen had made her move. She tried to take a piece of my great-grandfather's land and dress it up in HOA code. But what she didn't realize, or maybe refused to believe, was that her whole little empire was teetering, propped up by bad paperwork, tired neighbors, and an HOA nonprofit that was bleeding from every side. And I had the leverage to take it all, quietly, legally, permanently. I started with the debt. Most HOAs run lean, small budgets, monthly dues, maybe a little reserve for landscaping or snow removal. But Oak Shadow had racked up thousands in legal fees trying to enforce Karen's boundary patrol projects. They weren't paying vendors on time. They'd gone through 3 landscaping contractors in 2 years, and they had over $40,000 in unpaid dues sitting in the books, tied up in collections. I got in touch with a small collections firm that had been trying to recover those liens for months, and I made them an offer, a quiet one. Within 3 weeks, I legally purchased a significant portion of Oak Shadow HOA's outstanding debt in the form of lien-backed rights and unpaid assessments. It didn't make me the king of the HOA, not yet, but it gave me a seat at the table and a whole lot of weight to throw behind any proposed changes. Next came the bylaws. Every HOA is bound by its own rules, and Oak Shadows were sloppy at best. They hadn't updated their charter in years, and they hadn't held a proper election since Karen first appointed herself president. I brought the documents to a real estate attorney named Max, an ex-HOA specialist who now helped people unwind poorly run associations. Max scanned the files and smiled. This board's one lawsuit away from collapse. You realize you now hold enough financial stake to request special motions, right? What kind of motions? Budget votes, leadership challenges, emergency meetings. If the board hasn't followed its own rules, which from this, they haven't, then your position as a debt holder puts you in a very unique spot. Define unique. Let's just say you can call a meeting they can't legally refuse. I didn't need more than that. The next part was about timing. I didn't want to blow things up. Not yet. I needed Karen to feel like everything was still under control, that her signs, her warnings, her fence line fantasies still meant something. So while she posted HOA reminders in mailboxes and tried to rally neighbors against encroaching ranch interference, I kept working behind the scenes. I filed my financial declarations with the HOA treasurer, which they legally couldn't ignore. I contacted 3 more neighbors who were tired of Karen's power plays. 2 of them still owed dues. I paid off their liens in exchange for voting proxy rights, signed, sealed, and notarized. Then I waited for the right moment. And finally, I filed it. A motion to hold an emergency special meeting of the HOA to address misuse of funds, violation of charter election rules, and leadership misconduct. Signed by proxy votes and financial stakeholders totaling over 35% of voting authority, enough to override any delay tactic. Karen couldn't stop it. She tried, of course, sent out a mass email saying the meeting was illegitimate and would not be recognized. The attorney wrote her back, CC&G the board, and citing 5 clauses from her own bylaws that said otherwise. If you fail to attend, a vote may proceed in your absence. Karen went quiet. But that Thursday evening, she showed up. The meeting took place in the community rec center. About 25 residents filled the chairs, some curious, others angry, and a few just holding coffee like they were watching a movie. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I stood calmly with Max at my side, along with the neighbors who had signed proxy rights over to me. We brought printed documents, signed motions, financial disclosures, and the original bylaws. Max opened the meeting by citing the proper procedure and the authority that triggered the special session. Then he introduced the motion. This community proposes the removal of Karen Delaney as acting HOA board president based on her failure to hold proper elections, misrepresentation of property boundaries, unauthorized expenditure of funds for legal threats, and violation of charter oversight. Karen scoffed. This is ridiculous. You're not even part of this HOA. I stepped forward. I am now. I hold over 30% of your association's outstanding lien stake, legally registered. And I've filed a motion using the same rules you've ignored for 6 years. She turned red. This is a rancher's revenge mission. You're trying to tear down a community. Someone from the back of the room, an older man who'd been fined for planting native shrubs, spoke up. No, you already did that. He's just cleaning up the mess. The vote wasn't even close. 18 for removal. 4 against. 3 abstained. Karen stood, muttered something about lawyers, and walked out without another word. By the next morning, her name was stripped from the HOA website. Her emails bounced back with an auto response. And by the weekend, A for sale sign stood in front of her custom brick home, just past the walking trail that used to face my fence line. The interim board appointed one of the quieter, level-headed residents to fill the gap until proper elections could be held. But the real victory was silence. No more signs, no more gate disputes, no more fake greenbelt claims or threats about benches, flower pots, or birdhouses. And the best part? That pasture, the one my great-grandfather carved by hand, sat untouched, undisputed, unclaimed except by blood. I didn't dismantle the HOA. I didn't need to. By buying the debt and using their own rules, I turned their system inside out and showed the whole neighborhood what real accountability looked like. And when you take control without ever raising your voice, the echo carries longer than any shouting match ever could. For a week after the vote, the entire neighborhood buzzed like someone had yanked the main breaker. Karen's sudden disappearance from the board wasn't just news. It was a shift in gravity. People who had whispered their frustrations behind closed doors were now openly talking about years of manipulation, of fines handed out like candy, of rules made up and enforced based on who Karen liked or didn't. At first, she tried to fight back. Mass emails, printed flyers in mailboxes, claims that her removal was illegal, that she was being persecuted, that a non-member rancher had staged a takeover of their peaceful community. But the funny thing about power is, once it slips, it rarely comes back looking the same. Her words didn't rally the community. They exposed her further, because now people weren't afraid to speak. A week later, the new interim board scheduled a town hall meeting, the first open forum HOA gathering in years. It was standing room only. Karen sat in the back, arms crossed, wearing sunglasses indoors like that would somehow shield her from the looks being thrown her way. The treasurer, a quiet, detail-oriented man named Russell, opened the meeting with one word: audit. The crowd fell still. Russell explained that after Karen's removal, the board initiated a financial review of all expenditures from the past 5 years. They brought in a third-party nonprofit accounting firm. The findings? Alarming. Over $23,000 spent on legal consultations that were never approved by majority vote. Thousands in landscaping work, paid to a company owned by Karen's cousin. A community event fund that never resulted in an actual event. And most damning of all, documentation showing that Karen had altered map overlays before submitting them to the city planning department, falsely labeling parts of my ranch as HOA-managed green space. That alone triggered a city planning violation report and possible charges for misrepresentation and filing false documents. Someone in the crowd let out a whistle. Another neighbor muttered, "Unreal." Karen didn't speak. She just got up and left. No one stopped her. The fallout didn't stop there. The interim board sent a copy of the audit to the county's nonprofit oversight office. The association, legally a nonprofit corporation, had failed to comply with multiple governance rules. No elections in over 6 years. No updated bylaws. No record of board meeting minutes filed properly since 2019. They were in breach of their own structure. The recommendation? Voluntary dissolution, which, under their charter, could be triggered by a supermajority resident vote, especially if the board no longer had quorum. And they didn't. After Karen's exit, 2 more board members resigned, not wanting to deal with the legal heat. A vote was scheduled, and by a count of 46-5, the Oak Shadow HOA officially dissolved. There's a strange silence that comes after a power structure collapses. No more monthly notices. No more violation slips in mailboxes. No more Karen, pacing the sidewalks like a self-appointed sheriff. The mailboxes remained. The landscaping didn't fall apart. The sky didn't cave in. The fences didn't crumble. People still watered their lawns. Only now, they waved when they saw me walk past. A few even crossed the invisible line between rancher and subdivision to say thank you. "You took a risk," one older woman said. "You protected what's real," another told me. "You reminded us what community's supposed to mean," one man said, looking almost guilty. Funny thing is, I wasn't trying to be anyone's savior. I just didn't want to lose what my great-grandfather gave me. And I wasn't about to let anyone, clipboard or not, take it away. The land? It was finally recorded with permanent separation status. Russell helped me file a motion with the county recorder's office, affirming that my parcel had no shared easement, no HOA ties, no code obligations. It was locked in. My lawyer went a step further, recording a notice of non-affiliation, a public declaration filed with the property records that stated, in legal terms, this property is and has always been independently owned and maintained, with no obligation to any homeowners association past or present. And just to drive it home, I had a custom cedar sign installed on the old pasture fence. Burned lettering. Simple and direct. Holloway Ranch, EST 1911, private property. Legacy land. No trespassing. No HOA jurisdiction. The neighbors laughed when they saw it, but they respected it, because it wasn't a threat. It was a truth. Of course, Karen wasn't done just yet. A few weeks after the HOA vote, she filed a complaint with the county clerk's office alleging hostile acquisition and fraudulent board activity. The filing didn't last a month. The county dismissed it outright, citing her misuse of funds, failure to hold elections, and falsified maps. They even recommended she attend a compliance seminar before seeking any other governance role in a nonprofit capacity. By then, her home was already listed on the market. She left quietly, in the early morning hours, a moving truck packed and idling just past the gate she once tried to claim. A few months later, the neighborhood formed a new kind of community group. Not a traditional HOA, a voluntary neighborhood association, open attendance, no mandatory dues, no enforcement powers. Just a group of folks who wanted to keep their streets safe, their trees trimmed, and their fire pit gatherings respectful. I wasn't a member, didn't need to be, but they invited me anyway. I showed up to the first meeting with a pie and a printout of the original Holloway deed, not to prove anything, just to share the history. They asked questions, listened, laughed, and someone even said, we should put that in a community time capsule. I handed them a copy. That land? It's more than property. It's memory. It's sweat that dried in the sun. Its fence lines hammered with aching arms. Its legacy passed down through calloused hands and hard-won harvests. Karen thought a clipboard gave her power. But power without respect is just noise. And the land never listens to noise. The first marker I placed wasn't fancy. Just a cedar post, stained deep and weatherproofed, with a simple steel plate bolted to the front. Holloway Ranch Boundary. Established 1911. Legacy maintained by family hands. I sank it 2 feet into the soil with my own shovel, just like my great-grandfather used to do. Right at the ridge line, where Karen once staked that plastic HOA sign. The one that claimed my family's pasture was community green space. That sign's long gone. But this one's not coming down. Over the next few weeks, I walked the edges of the land, not to patrol, not to defend, but to reconnect. I found old markers hidden under brush, rusted fence wire wrapped around gnarled roots, stone piles once used to mark corners, still mostly intact. With every step, I added a new piece of history back into the open. I cleaned the trail down to the creek, repaired the bench where my grandfather used to drink coffee at sunrise, planted wildflowers around the gatepost just like my great-grandmother had. Some folks asked why I was doing it. To remind people this wasn't just land. It was a promise, and I intend to keep it. The community responded in kind. At the next neighborhood meeting, the voluntary one, not the old HOA dictatorship, they surprised me. One of the neighbors, Susan, stood up and presented a framed aerial photo of the ranch taken from drone. Underneath, it was a plaque. To the Holloway family, for preserving what matters most. The room clapped. I didn't know what to say. I'd never done any of this for attention. But I felt something shift that night, a quiet sense of unity that replaced years of division. People started seeing the ranch not as some distant patch of farmland, but as a living monument to resilience. Karen? She was long gone by then. Her house sold. Her emails disconnected. Her silence at last golden. Some said she moved across the state. Others claimed she was trying to start fresh in a different HOA. Wherever she went, it didn't matter anymore. She was just a footnote in a much longer, older, and richer story, one she never had the right to write in the first place. Now, when I sit on the porch, I don't just see hills and trees. I see chapters. The trail my father carved for horses. The fence line my grandfather mended after storms. The pasture my great-grandfather slept beside on nights when lightning lit up the valley. It's all still here, because I didn't give it up, because I didn't fold when someone waved fake authority in my face. Because when the pressure came, I stood on what mattered, not just the dirt but the name written into it. One morning, I saw a father walking with his son along the fence line, pointing out the marker I'd installed. The boy asked what it meant. The dad said, "It means some things don't change, not even when people try to take them." That's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not attention, just the truth protected. And now, that truth is planted deeper than any gate post Karen ever drilled into the ground. It's in the wind that crosses the ridge, in the soil under every cedar, in the name, HOA, carved into wood and memory and land that endures. Sometimes what looks like a pasture is really a legacy, carved by hands long gone, carried forward by every sunrise over a ridge that still stands tall. It's not just land, it's memory. It's the kind of story you don't tell with words, but with fences, boots, and roots too deep for maps to measure. Karen thought a clipboard and some printed bylaws could erase all that. She thought a fake rulebook could outrank a century-old deed. And when she tried to turn family land into community space, she learned a hard truth. You can't annex history. I didn't just push back. I bought in. I learned their system. I flipped their script. And in the end, I didn't just win the fight. I took the whole fight away from them. So if someone ever tries to rewrite your family's story, don't just argue. Don't shout. Dig in. Get the records. Learn the law. Own the truth. Because while drama fades, deeds endure. And legacy? Legacy is what remains when all the fences fall.